Welcome to the Small Business Contracts Coach.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Small Business Contracts Coach with attorney Darryl Shaper of the fixed fee law firm PLLC. Darryl brings 30 years of business and legal experience helping Texas entrepreneurs build clear, practical contracts at fair and predictable prices. I'm Sean O'Connor, and today joining us is Gil Melman. Gil's founding partner of the BT Attorneys law firm. He brings decades of experience as a general counsel and business advisor, working on complex transactions, compliance, and company strategy. Today, the three of us are going to break down how AI is actually showing up in small businesses and what can go wrong if it's not handled correctly. Gentlemen, good to see you both.
Good to see you, Sean.
Great to see you, Sean.
I got a bunch of questions teed up here. I'm going to start with Gil. Gil, you've been inside companies at the executive level. Where are you actually seeing AI show up in real operations right now? Not in theory, but in actual day-to-day operational use.
Yeah, so we're seeing quite a bit of use actually, and both authorized and unauthorized. And what we're seeing is a lot of companies that are sort of not addressing it. They understand it's going on, but they're not being proactive about it. And so, I mean, you can look at the Exxons and the Apples and the big folks are throwing a bunch of resources and developing policies, but there's a whole lot of people who don't yet know how to coach their employees, put into place policies, institute guidelines for how to use AI, what's acceptable and what's not. So we're seeing it's sort of kind of a wild west out there, and all different companies are doing all different things. So what we don't have is everybody sort of following a sort of middle of the fairway approach.
Yeah, all over the place. And Darryl, I'm guessing none of this surprises you in terms of guidelines and regulations and policies and procedures have not kept up with the speed of the AI adoption, right?
It's true. Although I would add a couple of things. I talked to a good friend this week, and I found it super interesting because this good friend both works at one of the biggest banks in the world, and he has his own small business. So there were kind of two perspectives. Number one, he works at this big bank, and at his bank, they're strongly encouraged to use Microsoft Copilot for sort of everything. And so they're told, and he said, people are using and abusing it. They say, write me this one sentence or correct. And then on the other side of the equation, he has a much better sense of the cost. I don't know if you know how AI works, but you have certain tokens. A token is approximately half a word, and you pay for the tokens as you use the tokens. In his small business, they're using AI, but sort of halfway through the day, they have a governor on how much they want to spend each day. They get a message, hey, you've used up all your tokens for the day. Whereas his big bank doesn't have that same restriction. So I do think as well as people using it sort of irresponsibly, they may be overusing it, and the actual spend on AI at these big companies may be spiraling a little bit out of control, such that they may have to rein that in at some point, because it isn't free. You pay for the tokens.
And I'm seeing overuse as being a big issue as well, and not in a different from the energy usage, but more from the I don't want to think anymore, and I'm just it becomes so easy to use. My clients are using it, and I'm like, really, not for this. You should not be, or they're taking the easy way out, and both at a commercial level and at a legal level. So the legal level, at least they send me the document and I can sort of fix it. But at the commercial level, they're just relying on it, and sometimes they're not getting a critical overview or evaluation of it, and they're just sort of accepting it as final work product.
Yeah, I'm interested in ownership issues. That's part of what, definitely main focus here. And, you've got this work product. What actually determines who owns AI generated work? What controls that in everyday practice? Darryl, you want to speak to that?
Sure. I mean, I actually don't know. I think we're in a zone of lack of clarity with respect to who owns the output, right? Um, and so I'm sure in the terms of use, it says something like ChatGPT or Anthropic owns the output or something like that, and you have a license to use it. But I haven't dug in, and it's absolutely clear that you, as the generator of some work product, probably don't have clear and unambiguous title to the work product when you've used an AI tool to create it.
Anything to add to that, Gil?
Yeah, I think you can still, believe it or not, rely on um, some traditional intellectual property analysis. And that is, look, if AI feeds you something that is verbatim or that is effectively plagiarism, you will be held to that legal standard, regardless of whether AI gave it to you and somehow put it in its own words. So I think,
Hmm.
regardless of the tool that you're using, whether it's, I mean, we all can, you can go back to copying from library books, searching the internet, and now having AI draft something in your voice, right? You still have those legal standards that are going to apply, and I think they still do apply. And I think for the most part, you're going to have you still have those issues. Teachers are obviously grappling with those on the forefront, right? But very core of everything is: are you cheating on your test, and are you cheating on your papers? So I think actually the sort of the traditional model still plays, but still sort of controls.
Well, I think I don't know if this is a traditional view, perhaps in some ways. A lot of business owners assume that, hey, if they created it or paid for it, then it's theirs. They own it. But I'm curious, do you see that assumption start to break down with AI, or is it, is there's too much ambiguity?
I think there's a high degree of ambiguity because it's pulling from a whole array of sources. And just like Gil says, it if it plagiarizes or, with law, the sort of overused, in my opinion, example is it makes up cases
Yeah.
and cites cases that don't exist. Well, that's on the responsibility of the lawyer. The lawyer should be checking
Totally.
that stuff.
Yeah.
And so same thing, if AI plagiarizes some other author, you really have to, you're responsible for that, as Gil was saying. And so you can't just assume, hey, it gave me completely new work product that I can take out into the world and use without any risk. I think that's a poor assumption, if you were to make that assumption.
Well, and Joe, you mentioned risk. I'm curious, Gil, I'll direct this at you from a company standpoint. How do you think about risk? When you've got teams in different departments, across the business using AI, and there's really no central coordination. Does there need to be, or does that not matter? What's your take on that?
I think there is a huge risk in using AI improperly. And I think it is a very, I won't say dangerous tool, but it is a sharp knife, and you've got to learn how to cut properly. And that means, learning how to make effective prompts, learning what's confidential and what's not. For instance, are you using AI outside of the walled garden of your membership? Are you just typing in, that's the very basic level, right? Is
Mhm.
just using the Copilot on your personal computer that you're not paying for, that where that information is out in the public domain. So there's so many levels of risk in using AI, and I think, as I've highlighted earlier, the biggest one is passing it off as your own work product and not giving it that final critical review to say, "Hey, this is only as good as somebody who works for me, but it isn't me." And so I have to give that final imprint to say, "Does this make sense?" I mean, I can't tell you, Daryl can attest to this. We will get work product as lawyers, and it's just wrong. And you're just like, you know what? Occasionally, it's just flat out wrong, and it's almost like you review it, and you're like, God, there's no way I can just, I have to review this because I've seen so many errors in the process. And sometimes, as you know, it gives you the answer you want, not the answer that you think is correct. So we're seeing that issue as well.
Yeah, for
You know,
sure.
the other thing I'd add to that, Gil, is when it's wrong, it's so confidently wrong. So you really have to know the subject
Right,
matter
right,
area
right, right.
because it will tell you with a completely confident attitude that the sky is purple. And you're
Right.
like, no, the sky is blue. And you know, then if you really correct it, it'll say, oh, you're right. The other day it was telling me that the coach of the Denver Nuggets was not David Adelman. I'm like, I'm sorry, I know that he is,
Right, right.
but it was completely confident that he was not the head coach. It was still Mike Malone. It just had old data.
Had old data stuck in the cache there. Absolutely, it
Yeah,
happens. Yeah.
exactly.
I mean, the less you know about the topic, the more convincing it is, I think, too, so.
Indeed, and that's when it becomes really dangerous.
I agree.
So I really think to use AI effectively, you need a level of expertise and understanding in the subject matter area that you're using it for. So, you know, again, as an example, you shouldn't be drafting legal documents with AI if you're not a lawyer because it is going to confidently make some significant mistakes. And so that's an important caveat.
Yes, completely agree. Completely agree.
In terms of credit and some of what we were talking about, I visited a new museum yesterday in my regular life, and the book that they gave us that covered the new exhibitions, the credits up front acknowledged that XYZ AI was used in the creation in some of this
Hmm.
organization of I think I mentioned like the table of contents and something else, and some summaries, and that all of that material was subsequently vetted, edited, changed, made better by people named in this book. So the other people, it was basically saying, hey, we've used AI on this in some ways inconsequential project. It's an arts, nothing rides on it, so to speak. But they were, full disclosure, naming names and assuring the reader. It's like, oh, that's interesting. You start to see like, oh, clearly they had some advice in terms of proper credits. You know what I'm trying to say here, but
That's so interesting. I haven't seen that
I
before
haven't seen that either.
in
I
a
haven't seen that either.
document, but it's great that they did
yeah,
that.
I mean
I mean, I actually
it's
don't want to
literally in
be.
a
Go ahead.
it's in an art catalog. And I was like, good on you.
I
I didn't need
guess.
to
I mean,
know
it's
that, but I'm glad to
like
know
a
it.
bibliography, right? I mean, you're basically saying this
Yeah,
is my source.
yeah.
Um,
Anyway, onward. I'm wondering, at what point does using AI stop being a casual tool and start becoming something that needs to be addressed in contracts, policies, or internal rules? And even as I reviewed that question, I'm like, did I write that question last year? Because I think we're there.
we are there. Absolutely.
We are absolutely there. But I do want to say, I feel like we're being negative on AI
Yeah.
and sort of pointing out a whole array of the risks. And that's not the message that I want to give to most people most of the time. So, again, if it's an area you have some expertise in so that you can check the AI's work, if it creates first drafts for you and then you do your added value on top of those drafts to make sure they're not plagiarizing and make sure that it's in your own tone of voice, etc. I'm a huge AI enthusiast. So I don't want to be the guy who says, hey, don't use this. It's got all these risks. Instead, I want to say, use it intelligently. Tell people when you feel like you have an obligation to disclose that you used AI, but use it. It's an incredibly valuable and useful tool. Don't be afraid to use it. Don't let the naysayers scare you away from using it.
Yeah, good point.
Yeah, and I would just add that I do think that as I'm helping companies now, I'm seeing so it started a couple of years ago where you had to have at least a minimum AI policy, which, and the evolution of those policies was, it started as easy as don't use it. and that lasted about 10 minutes. And then it was use it, but use use our program that we've registered for. Now it's, all right, use everything, but here are the guardrails that you need to use, even if you're going to use a personal version of AI. So it's, we're seeing the evolution, and those policies are catching up with actual use. So I do see companies, or I'm advising companies, to try to meet people where they really are, as opposed to sort of laying down saying, only use Copilot and our authorized version of Copilot in our in our domain. I mean, I appreciate that, and that's an easy policy to draft. But is it realistic? And query what people are actually doing. And young people especially are going to sort of disregard that. And, a policy that nobody follows is not a particularly well drafted or well thought out policy. Now I'm seeing, and I actually just did this for a client, we're putting in guardrails for an independent contractor agreement. Here's our expectation for how you will use AI, and here's where we think you should stop using AI. And Darryl mentioned that you got to have that. We're actually putting into contracts saying, we know you're going to use AI, but we expect this to have your imprimatur at the end, and we expect a final review of this document. So we do, but we're insisting. So these clients are insisting that AI work product is only partially complete, and if you deliver an AI product without a human review on top of it, that is a failure of the deliverable. So we're going to start to see more and more people sort of putting those guardrails around how they want the people that they engage with to use AI.
Well, that makes a lot of sense. I mean, it's all about, it's really akin to, I've signed many an independent contractor agreement where, it may ban me from subcontracting the work that I say I'm doing, or will require disclosure thereof, and I think that, the AI is more complex than that, but similarly, that Gil, you mentioned earlier, I think old tools, so to speak, or some of the old rules still can be applied to the new tech in terms of managing its implementation, because clearly, the genie's out of the bottle, as they say.
Right. Right.
And I forget who, I don't know if that was you and I, Darryl, in a previous conversation where, as a law firm, as an attorney, if you're being handed, or if you're using AI as a virtual assistant, so to speak, you've got to treat any of that work product like it's being done by, a summer intern, or at best a first year associate. And, over time it may get better at its job, but, unsupervised is just not going to cut it.
That's Darryl. That's interesting that you're at a first year associate. I kind of give it a fourth year associate level. So my view is it's pretty good. I mean, it's about 85% there. I mean, first year I'm rewriting the entire thing. Fourth year I'm correcting a few things. I'm making, but generally speaking, it's in decent shape. So it's funny that we have different.
Full disclosure, I have no idea what the difference between a first and fourth year associate
Yeah, that's a very
is, but I do understand. You get my point.
Well,
made.
It'd be interesting to see different lawyers how they view AI, where it stands in the food chain in terms of the level of associate that they are looking at it and treating it as such, right?
Well, and some of this does come down to, there's a whole, and I've taken a number of classes, and seminars and such. I mean, there's a whole skill level in prompting and how you use the tool, right? And so
100%.
Obviously, if a first year associate using AI versus a fourth year associate using AI, that AI output should be partner level if you're the fourth year associate.
Right.
But I'm not trying to replace you guys. Let's sign off. I know we'll talk again soon. Super interesting topic. Good to see you both.
Thank you.
Thank you, Sean.
That's it for today's episode of the Small Business Contracts Coach. To learn more about Darryl Shaper and his fixed fee contract services for small business, visit his website, fixedfeelawfirm.com. And to learn more about Gil Melman and his work advising businesses on transactions, compliance, and legal strategy, visit btaattorneys.com. I'm Sean O'Connor. Thanks for listening, and be sure to give us a thumbs up, subscribe, maybe even leave a review if you found this episode helpful. Have a great day.
Thanks for watching. Be sure to hit that like and subscribe button and leave us a review in the comments.